Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is Week 12 Cyberpunk Chaos.
And joining us today is...
Jason, it's me, also known as the Blue Jay. Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Good to have you on the show, Jason. Thank you for joining us today.
It's an absolute honor. I'm excited to, get to talk about these movies with y'all. Y'all know I've been really excited to hear y'all's thoughts.
Yeah, Jason's been a good friend of ours, and he does movie reviews on his own channel, which we'll plug later. So he suggested we watch some more anime after Miyazaki a couple weeks ago, and this is like the dark and gritty side of Miyazaki's happy, fun side.
Absolutely. It's definitely a way to put it.
Right, and these are movies that are totally new to both me and Jonathan, but
yeah,
I know, Jason, you've had a very long, I guess relationship is the right word, with some of these films at least, that you've seen and loved for a long time, so it'll be really cool to have your kind of like long-term perspective on it, especially with these coming back into the limelight now with the Ghost in the Shell remake.
Yes, absolutely, which we'll probably talk about later on. I'm going to actually see that one for my channel, so we'll see about that.
and even Akira, but we'll talk about that in a second also.
Yeah, more rumors about that.
Yeah.
Right. Once Hollywood gets on a remake binge, they don't stop. So
They don't stop. That's been this whole year.
Yeah, this year is insane. Like just remake and reboot and sequel, and I'm excited for Dunkirk because it's like the
There you
only original thing I could find.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah, but we're just doing our best over here on the Filmlings to stay ahead of the curve. And this week, Jason is joining us, and we are going to talk about our theme, which is Cyberpunk Chaos. As you'll know, not all the movies this week have the same director, so we'd like to talk about those as themes. And the three movies we're talking about this week are 1988's Akira, 1995's Ghost in the Shell, so the original, not the reboot, and then 2006's Paprika, which is not Inception, but is kind of Inception. And we'll talk about that more when we get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, each of these films have had a big influence on some really big Western films, so we'll talk about that. And another kind of thread that goes through all these is this idea of kind of dual identities and, discovering yourself and the way technology influences our own self-images.
And another thing that I got into this week, and I hope we can drive home for our audience in this episode, is kind of dispelling that attitude that you see sometimes in mainstream culture, where people will turn their nose up or kind of scoff at just the thought of anime. They think it's silly or childish. But as we'll see, these are really fantastic films, technically, story-wise, metaphorically, that don't just have the respect of anime enthusiasts like us, but mainstream filmmakers in the United States whose work is widely respected in the mainstream, like Christopher Nolan. So we're kind of tracing that thought back, and one of the things that I really hope our audience comes away with this week is, if they don't already have it, a newfound respect for anime as an art form that is legitimate and not silly.
Right.
Yeah, but I think another thing that we'll talk about is where we can see kind of how the cultural difference and the differences in like the use of language and the way that dubs are done can kind of add to that kind of strangeness. That's watching an anime film is very different than watching an American film, but that doesn't make it any less worthy of our attention. But we can definitely see the differences there.
Absolutely. And if I may chime in on something as well, just based on experience, with, people like kind of pushing back on, Japanese film in general, it's a different perspective. And I think some people are just afraid of seeing different ideals, when they see, the stuff that is, going on screen with the Japanese film or anime for that matter, it is shell shocking. It's weird, and if you walk in on it, sometimes you're just like, what are you watching, son? very weird things go on in these shows, but it's important to have an open mind when you watch these movies because they do bring different perspectives. And I think that's what's really exciting is learning, from these movies and shows and, whatnot.
And that is what we are all about here on Filmlinks. So with that, let's dive into our first movie of the week, Akira.
So basically, Akira is about Neo Tokyo. It takes place in 2019. It's this cyberpunk kind of world. This is right after World War III. And so you see these characters that, they're teens and they're just kind of, going through the motions of their lives until one day one of their friends encounters this weird child-like person. It's going to get weird here if you haven't seen this.
A green child.
A little green child. And it's from that moment on that he gets basically kidnapped and starts getting experimented on and starts getting these crazy psychokinetic abilities. And it's from that moment on that he starts gaining power and awakens a god, essentially. I don't want to say too much because I don't really want to spoil it, but this is a god that has been buried, beneath the city, for years, and people have been waiting for this god to awaken, and it's kind of hard to explain, actually. Dang,
Yeah,
it is hard to explain.
Kind of. And just to clarify, the green child isn't the one who got kidnapped. It's the kid who kind of literally ran into the little green child.
Maybe I should give names. His name's Tetsuo, this character. He's one of the main characters.
But Tetsuo is one of the two main characters. He's the one you were talking about who gains superpowers, basically. Except they're kind of not superpowers. They're kind of like next evolutionary step powers. And that ends up being a very big theme throughout the movie. And then our other big player, kind of the protagonist we follow and root for across the movie is Kaneda, who is the leader of the teenage bike gang that Tetsuo is from and one of Tetsuo's best friends / rivals. And the story, if anything, is big and dramatic and epic, but it's also kind of on a microscopic scale. The story of the end of their friendship over the course of the film.
That's deep. I could not have said that any better.
There's a lot going on in this movie. And all of these movies, so we're going to do our best to describe them.
Yeah, it gets difficult because certainly with Akira and Ghost in the Shell, you're looking at two franchises that were large and popular mangas before they were ever made into movies. So they already have a very deep, colorful world behind them with very fleshed out characters that are then being taken to the big screen. And just a little disclaimer, I haven't read any of the mangas associated with Akira or Ghost in the Shell or the book that Paprika is based on. So I don't know the source material from them, but I can only imagine that there's a lot more to draw on. So when you take it to a movie format in a fantasy, sci-fi, cyberpunk world, you're going to end up with a super complex plot with a lot of layers to it. And you certainly do end up with that here, but we can only go so deep into them in this format.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about kind of across all of these movies, but the fact that it kind of feels like you would have more information if you knew the mangas before going into them, going into these movies, because the exposition of these Japanese narratives is very different, at least from the way that American narrative is, and it takes a while to actually fully get a picture of what's going on. I don't know if it was trying to be mysterious or what, but it was just kind of they keep bringing up things that aren't explained, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna keep going along and hope that this pays off, which of course it does, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of confidence in where they're going with it at the beginning, because they just keep bringing up mysteries, I guess.
And that's really the thing with Japanese entertainment in general, is it's most often based off of a manga. And so when they bring it over to a 2-hour film, there's so much that is just brushed over and not explained. And that's just with all of their stuff. I mean, there's so many questions that I came away with. I think we all came away with questions from each of these movies, but like in Akira, I was very confused
about Akira, which we can't talk about too much, but I was a little confused about the mutant children and a couple of other things that they kind of get into, but not in depth. And I feel like that's where the knowing the source material kind of adds to the experience, I guess.
Yeah. I'll also say that I ended up watching both of these, or all three of these movies, twice this week.
Oh, wow.
And since there's so much in each one of them, it's really easy to miss stuff. And that second time that I watched them was just a continual series of, oh, that makes so much more sense now. About every 5 minutes while watching the film. And
that's what's fun about these movies. It's awesome.
Yeah, it feels like it doesn't feel so much like a rewatch at that point. It feels like a new experience. And I really recommend watching each of these movies more than once if you have the time. I highly recommend it.
I most certainly agree.
So let's talk about the style of this movie, because it's kind of amazing. the animation in all three of these movies is just spectacular. And this one, I know, has a lot of very specific uses of light. Yes. And I think, Alex, you had a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Jason, but this was all done with cell animation, correct?
Absolutely, it was. Painstakingly every single frame. It's amazing.
Which makes it even more amazing when you watch or take a look at this cyberpunk environment they've been immersed in with these lights and neon everywhere. There's spotlights sticking up in the sky, and it's essentially the world we dive into first in Neo Tokyo is this world of teenage biker gangs.
It felt like the Japanese Outsiders to me.
That's what you were saying. Yeah. Agreed.
But they're all these cyberpunk style bikes. So as they're racing around fighting each other throughout the city, they leave these light trails behind them.
So cool.
And I don't want to risk diving too much into that metaphorically.
Yeah, it's almost foreshadowing in a sense.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah. But you can, first of all, it's just beautiful. And second of all, it makes the scenes and the characters stick with you. So even when you see Tetsuo start to demonstrate his psychic powers, almost all of his psychokinetic powers involve some usage of light, or the lights reacting to them.
Yeah, changing in light.
Yeah, there's one point where he kills these guards in the hall.
It's a cool scene.
Which is a really cool scene. But the second he kills them, all the lights go out in the hall.
All the lights go out, yeah.
And then they come back when he's done. And it kind of serves as a metaphor for life, the pulsing beat of this city to a certain extent. And by the way, it serves as a metaphor for about 1 million things. So I'm not saying it's only for that. But the idea of life and the evolution of life is a big part of this movie, and the light motifs kind of help pull the entire movie together. So you feel like you're in the same space across it.
Yeah, and one of the biggest uses of light, I don't want to talk about the specifics of the situation, but it's basically this huge nuclear explosion that kind of wipes out the whole city. This happens in multiple places during the movie, and it's extremely reminiscent of course, the atomic bombs, even though they're never actually called atomic explosions or nuclear disasters. But I thought that was very interesting. I know I know they're not, but it's. I mean, it looks just like that, and I mean the fact that, of course, atomic destruction is very close to Japanese culture.
Yeah.
Was really interesting to me.
And, to continue with the animation, another thing aside from the light, because that's really impressive, but another impressive thing about the animation is just you really feel the weight of the situations. When someone is getting shot, you feel that person getting shot. When somebody's in pain, you feel the writhing in pain. When there's an explosion, you feel the weight of the explosion. I mean, it's the animation, because it is all done like painstakingly frame by frame. You're able to get more of the weight of the animation, if that makes sense. It's just very weighty and it feels good. It's organic and it's raw, and I love that. The gore too, the way everything just kind of flows and it's nasty, and I don't know. This is one of my favorite examples of really well done fluid animation, especially from Japan.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is that none of this was done by computer, because I feel like that's the modern perception of animation is that it's all done on a computer, but this is all hand drawn.
Absolutely, and you can just tell just the way the buildings they almost look as if they're watercolored, and the reflections, they don't look like a CGI reflection. You can see the soft shades and everything. It just feels real, even with it being animated like that.
Yeah, and that makes it even more impressive, especially like I was just saying, in a day and age where most of the animation we see, especially here in the West, which ironically is done in like Korea, is done on a computer for the most part, which doesn't take away from the artistry of it, but it is definitely a different time. And it was a different time, especially for Japanese anime, because it wasn't super popular in the West, but it was starting to break in, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I have the dates correct. I mean, I'm sure Dragon Ball Z was around, or just Dragon Ball in general. That was one of the animes that were very popular. But Akira, when that came into the Western world, no one had seen anything like this. It definitely pushed boundaries, but people loved it. People resonated with it because you don't get that very often in American cinema. And but yeah, Akira definitely is the reason why anime is as popular as it is today. I mean, just think of all the stuff that's coming out now. It's even more popular today, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of animes that not even just anime fans, but a lot of people are starting to watch them now. I remember being, even in the 2000s, there were people that wouldn't even want to look at it. I mean, you could watch anime on Adult Swim and stuff like that, but not everybody watched it. And now everybody, even people I never even thought would watch this stuff, is watching it. Like you guys, it's people are taking it more seriously.
Yeah,
but
I
it all
would definitely
started.
include myself in that group.
Yeah. It's exciting.
I definitely would. I kind of looked down on it in high school, I think, and now that I've kind of had experience in it, and you grow to appreciate it, because my at least personally, my vision of animation, my idea of what animation was Disney kids animation. Animation is for children, and animation is this clean cut Disney style animation. But there's a lot more to do with it. It's just another style of filmmaking. It's not limited to certain genres. And Akira is proof of that, obviously. It's shockingly beautiful, and it covers some very deep, meaningful themes that high school me would be blown out of the water to see covered in an animated film. And now I'm more open to this kind of stuff, and I really, really love watching it and seeing it develop. And you can see that acceptance come through more and more into the mainstream, with more reboots coming around for anime films in Hollywood.
Yeah, for example, news that I just heard about this week, I think just broke this week, or last week if you're listening to this on Tuesday, is that Jordan Peele of recent Get Out fame and of Key and Peele is now slated to direct a live-action version of Akira, which should be fascinating to track its development, because this is not a film that you watch and you're like, oh yeah, someone could totally film this in live action.
And I was going to say, they were going to actually, there was rumors even before this, years before this, that they were going to do a live-action Akira, and I think they had like rumors of who they were going to cast. Like Helena Bonham Carter was going to play as that priestess, the one with the beads, and the one that was kind of leading that protest. Weird stuff like that. Yeah. It was going to be like that. Role.
That's such a Helena Bonham Carter role, though.
It is. But it's kind of weird to see that this is still, Warner Brothers is still trying to do this. And I'm totally down with Peele doing it. He's got a really interesting knack for like horror and just suspense. I can see it happening.
social commentary now, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're proving
And,
themselves, both Key and Peele, to be much more versatile than we thought they were in their pure Comedy Central days. And I'm excited to see more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that the remakes that we can see with the interest of remakes like this, and of course the Ghost in the Shell that's just come out, is to kind of put the films in a way that's a little bit more accessible to American audiences, because definitely watching these or coming into these movies fresh this week, you can see the differences in how Japanese narratives are presented. For example, they're pretty light on exposition, which I think I touched on before. And also just the voice acting is not like when we watch the Miyazaki movies where they're dubbed by Disney and really well-known actors and people who have done a lot of voice work.
Yeah.
These dubs were
They were juggled around.
Yeah,
different
less convincing to me.
Yeah.
And they felt like, I don't know exactly how the Japanese language is structured, but I get the sense that they're able to convey an idea with much shorter spurts of language than we are. So some of the lines felt really crammed in to fit with the mouth animation and stuff.
Sometimes even stretched out.
Yeah, it was strange, but I can see how someone who's already tentative about watching anime could kind of find all these little sticking points that makes them kind of out of their comfort zone of what they're used to in American film and kind of turn them off before they really have given it a chance.
And it's unfortunate because chances are they probably won't even watch the Japanese language version either. They're going to want to watch something that's in English. And so if it's that the dub isn't up to par, it's a missed opportunity.
And I mean, there's obviously pros and cons of each. Like I watched Akira and Ghost in the Shell in English dubs this week and Paprika in the Japanese subtitles. And so if you have good dubbed versions, then you're able to take in the visuals a lot more because you're able to actually watch the frames instead of reading the subtitles. But if you have the subtitle versions, then you kind of get the emphasis of the voice more accurately, obviously, because that's how it's supposed to be recorded.
Yeah, that's kind of been a stereotype of Japanese and Eastern film in general for ever, almost. If you go way back to old martial arts films,
yeah,
out of sync mouths is kind of one of the big stereotypes there, and that's because of bad dubbing. But thankfully, I think, especially in large part due to Miyazaki, I think we can thank him a lot for this.
Sure,
is much better dubs are coming around these days. So if if an Akira caliber movie was made next year in an animated style in Japan and gained a distribution deal in the US, it would be dubbed by some of the biggest names that they could hire. Because that's exactly what you see with Miyazaki movies. Really big names doing really great dubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually interested, Jason, because you were thinking about watching a movie called Your Name recently, which is a pretty new Japanese animated film with kind of a Freaky Friday flair to it.
A little bit, yeah.
But do you know if they have English dubs and if the English dubs are done by anyone notable?
Absolutely. I couldn't tell you the names of the people. I've yet to look at the cast. This movie came out last year, technically, but Funimation, which is a very big dubbing company, they're the ones who did Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, yeah.
They actually did Akira?
Well,
is that right?
If I may give you a fun fact, Akira was dubbed by Bandai. Now, there was a company that dubbed it even before that, but it wasn't as good. Not a lot of people wanted to watch that. Bandai got the rights, and so this is the one that everybody hears. I think you mentioned it was dubbed in 2001, something like that. But anyways, Bandai had a big falling out. They went bankrupt. So Funimation, amazing, they bought the rights to the show, and so they were able to re-release it. And so they've been doing that with a lot of Bandai products. That's
but they didn't redub it. They just re-released it.
No, they didn't redub it. But even still, it's pretty exciting that Funimation.
Yeah, they really should.
I guess that's kind of true. But then again, this is the one that people have seen, and it's got a charm to it. With the cheesiness.
Yeah, the dub on this one can be characterized by characters yelling a lot.
Cut it out, Tetsuo!
Everybody yells. In contrast to Ghost in the Shell.
Oh, yes.
Which, should we get into Ghost in the Shell now?
Yeah, let's talk about a different kind of bad dubbing. Jonathan, do you want to tell us a little bit about what that movie's all about?
Oh, man.
Yeah, again, as much as we can without spoiling it, because these movies get all these movies get super spoilery at the end. Although Paprika will be hard enough to describe, let alone spoil.
There you go.
So Ghost in the Shell takes place after World War IV this time.
Amazing.
The world is extremely divided. Japan is now the reigning superpower, and we're set in the city called Newport City. And we're kind of following these two detectives who are tracking an American hacker who has the hacker's name is the Puppet Master.
There you go. I blanked too.
I was trying to remember
all these names.
So they call him the Puppet Master because essentially in this dystopia, everyone is the best way to describe it is from a movie that was heavily influenced by this film, which is The Matrix. Mm-hmm. So everyone has these little ports in their body that they can connect to a matrix of information and all this stuff. But someone is hacking in.
Of information.
There you go. So someone has been hacking into it and taking control of people's. So to back up, basically your soul or your brain network is called your ghost in this world, and your body, which is basically just hardware to assist your ghost, is called the shell.
Hence the title.
So the hacker can hack into people's ghosts and control their shell so that he can use their body to do things that they don't know that they're doing and implant memories and stuff like that. So really throughout the film, there's this whole tension of self-identity because when your psychological self is separated from your bodily self, it becomes very confusing to know who you are and what you are and all this kind of stuff. And we go through another kind of evolutionary process in this one. But yeah, that's in a nutshell as best as I can describe it. Oh my gosh.
Get out.
This is pun week apparently.
And I just want to be super clear before we go farther into this movie, especially for anybody who has plans to see the new Ghost in the Shell, that this movie is not based on The Matrix. The Matrix is based on this movie.
There you go.
Get it.
Thank you for saying
straight.
So if anybody goes and sees the Scarlett Johansson reboot and is like, they just copied The Matrix.
Oh,
no.
gosh.
Nope.
No. No.
And believe it, there are people saying that.
Are there Matrix references in it? Yes, and that's weird.
That's really weird and meta.
But
I will say it's not.
This is the OG one.
The Matrix isn't exactly based on it. It just took a lot of influences from the world building.
There are some other movies that got influenced too.
It just took almost all of its conventions from it.
Yeah, Westworld actually takes some conventions of the shell building and stuff.
Yeah.
The intro of this film has some shots that are almost exactly mirrored in the Westworld intro.
Although, did you know that Westworld is a reboot of a movie from the 70s?
Yeah, I did.
I didn't realize that at first until a few weeks ago. One of my favorite streamers was talking about that. I was like, oh, no way. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up because there's actually a bunch of other worlds too that I'm interested if the show is going to get into that.
That's cool.
Anyway,
guys.
unrelated.
Everything is a reboot or an influence. Nothing is original. Art is art inspired by art, rebooting art, remaking art.
Yeah, we've talked about that in two of our other podcasts about this whole idea of art recycling itself. So it's not bad. It's just the more new that you can make it, and if you take old ideas and use it to push new themes and explore new ideas, that's what it's about.
It's progressive.
You know what would be great? An art recycling T-shirt.
Okay, we'll maybe we have a graphic designer listening. Out of our 30 listeners.
I know a guy. That's a good idea.
We'll work on that.
Just a soft pitch out there. But anyway, back to Ghost in the Shell and the entire question of what is an identity, what does it mean to be human, at what point have you replaced enough of your body with technology that you're no longer a person? How can you trust that your memories are your memories if somebody could hack into your brain and change them? Is technology the next evolutionary step for humans? Thoughts?
It almost seems like it is with a lot of the things that science is starting to do. Like I never would have imagined a lot of the stuff they're doing, like with robotic arms. It's happening. Robotic arms are happening.
Tetsuo.
Oh yeah. Ooh, those are some bad side effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience to watch it now in 2017.
Yeah, it is.
Versus
Goodness.
1995, when you can have a prosthetic that can link into your nervous system.
Sure. Well, it's weird that you mentioned that, because a lot of movies that came out in the 80s and such, they always kind of ballparked it at like somewhere where we are now, like 2019, 2030, stuff like that. That's pretty near now. And so it's interesting to kind of look at the way things are now and comparing, like, what did they get right? Back to the Future is a good example of that. I don't know.
So
Yeah, it's
lots
interesting.
of fax machines in a house?
Oh yeah, we totally got that far. Look at that.
No.
Yeah, but it's interesting as far as all of these questions, like the answers that the movie seems to present is that, yes, this is the next, I guess, evolutionary process, but it's almost like it's saying that it is the only way to perfect the human experience in a strange way. There's a quote that starts running through our protagonist's head randomly, which is, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known." Which is actually a quote from the Bible. It's 1 Corinthians 13:12.
That's cool.
Where the Apostle Paul is talking about our experience after death with resurrected bodies, which are incorruptible and eternal. And that's kind of, I guess, what the film is trying to get at from a technological perspective. This idea that if a person can merge with an infinite network of information and can constantly be rebuilding their shell, their body, because it's not even human, it's just a bunch of hardware that can be replaced and remade, then that is the only way to create the perfect human experience, like I said. So it's an interesting idea that this film seems to be getting into, which is kind of different from the evolution in Akira.
Yeah.
It definitely tackles some really big, really interesting themes in kind of similar setting to Akira, but in a different outlook. It's almost kind of optimistic, whereas Akira is all about destruction and the end of things. Whereas Ghost in the Shell is it's almost about the genesis of something new. Which is a really interesting contrast between the two movies. And the contrast don't stop there, even though they're rooted in this cyberpunk world, which is just as beautiful in Ghost in the Shell as it is in Akira. But in Ghost in the Shell, it's this will sound weird, but I can't think of a better word. It's a lot less animated than is in Akira. The world
absolutely.
of Akira is all about movement, but the world of Ghost in the Shell almost feels kind of robotic and cold and sterile.
Yeah, it's very, very still, very, I guess, methodical and kind of,
not a lot of facial expressions.
Yeah.
Yeah, if any, sometimes, because the idea is that the shells, you don't have to use your mouth to speak, really. You can. You just have kind of this speaker system that, since it's all a robotic system, essentially. And it's interesting the fact that they change between speaking through whatever speaker system they have in their body and actually using their mouths to simulate vocal speaking, and they kind of switch between it for kind of no reason, just to remind the audience that these aren't people, these are robots, I guess.
Yeah, because you do kind of find them, you find yourself kind of feeling them, like, oh yeah, this is a person, and so the movie's constantly reminding you, no, these are not really people. So that is interesting you mentioned that. I didn't think about that. Huh.
Yeah, and it's an interesting. That part was definitely intentional because it's part of the original Japanese film, but it worked in an interesting combination with the English dub, which is either
awful.
spot on if you're going for cold, no emotion roboticness, or terrible if you don't know what's going on. And I found myself conflicted between those two poles while I was watching the movie. I was like, either this is really smart and well done dubbing, or it's terrible. It's one of the two.
It's so confusing, but it really does work, in its favor with those characters. But sometimes it just drags.
Because like at points in the film there are emotion and intensity in the voices, and then at other points, like the most dramatic points when our protagonist is talking through her confusion about what she is, and well, I don't even want to say she really, because there's a confusion about that too, since the bodies are robotic and the ghosts can be implanted anywhere. There's really no correlation between body gender and mental gender. But anyway, during this point when she's kind of going through all of these ideas, is the most stoic reading of lines throughout the whole movie. And it's just like, okay.
It felt like it should be a little emotional. Like if there's one part where you break
anything,
the coldness and insert some emotion, that would be it. Or maybe, it could be a side effect of what people knew about voice recordings in 1995, since she was obviously, speaking off of that. They didn't have Siri or even, some kind of, what is the word that I'm thinking about?
Oh gosh,
artificial voice recordings.
Yeah,
where it's drawing from a bank of pre-recorded messages.
Yeah,
like Siri does, and they just underestimated that technology. Maybe I don't know. It could be many things.
The other option is just a terrible voice actor. Who knows?
it's probably part of that too, because while Ghost in the Shell did okay in Japan, but it really took off in the U.S. comparatively. And obviously it had a really big effect on movies like The Matrix, and then later on Westworld, like you guys were saying earlier, and kind of achieved this classicness in the West that it maybe didn't achieve quite to the same extent in Japan.
Yeah, I get the feeling that a lot of the appeal comes from the world building and the technology and, all of these innovative ideas that are put in here, like people connecting through their necks into their cars to get information, and the invisibility of the shells and all of that kind of stuff, more so than the actual story that was going on underneath. The story almost seems like, at least to the American influence, more of a shell for all the cool
the puns
technological innovations.
Puns don't stop.
It won't stop.
Can't stop.
We get more puns in Paprika, so get ready.
Oh,
for
yeah, get ready for that.
And they just do it.
They were in the movie, yeah.
Once I realized they were like turning into that curve, I got really excited. But one of the most interesting things about Ghost in the Shell is that it's a dated movie to 1995, and even now, The Matrix is a dated movie too, because
The Matrix gets a pass. I'll talk about that if you want.
Oh, whatever.
I think The Matrix gets a pass because the plot of the story is that the world stopped in 1999, so you literally can't dock it for technology.
These super mega enlightened machines can innovate. You're telling me they couldn't invent Wi-Fi? That's what I'm getting at. There's no need for anybody to shove a giant
Why would they give
needle
the
in your
humans
neck.
Wi-Fi?
They
wouldn't
let
give the
Y2K
humans
stop them.
Wi-Fi.
Because they wouldn't know they had Wi-Fi. They would just be in...
The humans couldn't develop Wi-Fi, and if the machines developed Wi-Fi, they wouldn't give it to the humans. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're just blinded by your Matrix love. But the point is, in Ghost in the Shell, it's like the 22nd century, and everybody's plugging in the back of their necks, which is a really cool visual. But let's be honest, if it was really 2149 or whatever it is in the film, we would all just be like using the microchip Wi-Fi enabled computer in our head.
True.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need a plug-in.
But that's not as visually interesting.
Which is true, and is a good point. I'm just saying it dates the movie.
So I did want to mention a fun fact about the dubbing before we move on. So if you listen carefully, I don't know if you caught this, Alex. You seem to have really noticed a lot of things. Let's see if you caught this. Did you hear the Canadian accents?
Slightly. I was wondering about that.
A lot of dubs in the 90s were done in Canada. And so if you listen carefully, their accents really come through. Like you'll hear a boot, which is my favorite one.
I don't know why that makes sense, but it does for some reason. Just
I know, that's what I'm thinking
1980s
too.
anime Canada. Why does that make sense?
That's funny.
I thought you might be interested in that. I thought it was funny.
So do we want to get into Paprika now? Alex has some strong feelings.
Spice it up with some paprika.
Oh, there it is. We've already started.
Oh my. Was that your attempt at an accent? I don't even know.
I was just saying something.
Yeah, he was just
How did they
excited.
say it? Paprika. I can't even do it. It's like they shorten the K almost. They shorten the
Paprika.
K.
Paprika.
It almost sounds like they're saying paprika.
Paprika. It's almost like a Pokemon.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Go Paprika.
if you can tell from our terrible impressions here, our Paprika was the only movie we watched this week in the original Japanese, which made a big difference in terms of the acting, because you really got the sense of the emotion, even though you had to kind of split your attention between the subtitles and the visuals.
I'm glad we got the opportunity to at least watch one of them in Japanese. So
Yeah.
it just kind of worked out.
I
Although
watched
at some
it twice,
point I
so
would
it didn't
probably
matter.
at some point I would probably watch it and just, even if it's in Japanese, turn the subtitles off because the visuals were friggin' amazing.
There you go.
I don't even think you need the dialogue in a
You really don't.
Cone movie. Like it's, don't get me wrong, the dialogue is fantastic, but I think you can just watch it and you're good. You know what's going on.
Well,
We should try that.
I barely knew what was going on with the subtitles, but that was kind of the point at a lot of points.
That's
Yeah,
true.
that's true.
That's true. It's definitely a surrealist movie.
Yeah.
But anyway, the
We might be getting into more of that later in the podcast.
the story.
Spoilers.
Oh no! Don't get Jonathan started on surrealism.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Anyway,
But anyway, the story of Paprika, it's interesting because it's the only one not set far in the future. It's set in the near future, probably either modern day or within like the next 20 years.
yeah, they don't specify, do they?
They
Not
don't
really.
specify, but you can pretty much assume that it's not too far away. There's no crazy motorbikes running around the streets. There's no crazy robots running around the streets. There's just regular
Well.
people and
Well, that's not entirely true.
Well, if I might.
There was one robot.
Yeah, just one.
there
that was
is
in the
actually
dream,
a super
though.
important robot. But
Well, if I may,
the
real
reason
quick,
we can
before
still,
you move on, I'm sorry. I wanted to say this one thing. This is really interesting. I just realized this. But, like, it's one of the first movies I've seen that portrays a more realistic looking future, if you get my drift.
Yeah, like a technology that we could actually have in the next 20 years.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
usually movies go, like, try to be innovative.
Right.
And
then
it
they just
kinda-
end up saturating the world in future tech,
Yes.
and you kind of lose the character of that space. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I get what you're saying.
thought I mentioned that. But yes, go ahead.
Like the future might have flying cars, but there's not flying cars everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like Looper, if I may even throw that in too, kind of did that because there was like hovering motorbikes and things, but it still looked like a more realistic future, like something we could see in the next few years. It looked pretty similar to our like now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why you can pretty comfortably say either modern day or within like the next 5 to 10 years. The central technology of the film is the DC Mini, which is a piece of technology. It's like a little headset that lets you enter other people's dreams and lets you share dreams. And it's being developed by two doctors, Tokita, who is the kind of engineer programmer behind the machine, and also Chiba, who is the psychologist and the protagonist of the film, alongside her alter ego. I don't feel like that's giving anything away. That's pretty obvious.
Yes.
From that trippy opening sequence.
Yeah. Her alter ego and the titular character, Paprika, who uses it to treat people's mental health issues. For instance, it's mentioned in the film that she helps the director of her program with depression, and she did it this way by entering his dreams and helping him work things out there.
She's like a freelance
because dreams is
person.
where our subconscious tension tends to release itself.
Yeah.
Right. In a very weird kind of surrealist manner that ends up expressing itself in the visual style of the film. But the story of the film follows the race to discover who stole the DC Mini, because someone stole it, and now someone is committing essentially dream terrorism.
Interesting phrase.
Among the workers of... It's 2017. We can still just tack terrorism onto every kind of crime.
It's awesome.
And that's what they do in this film. It's dream terrorism.
And it is terrifying.
It is terrifying, and it is life-threatening. And it basically feels like somebody's trying to halt the production of the DC Mini by stealing it and attacking the people who are making it. And it's this search by this psychologist and her team to try to stop this person, who we don't know who it is, by the way. It's a mystery.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, and I should also mention, before we move on, kind of in parallel to that mystery, kind of one of the side characters, but definitely a main character in the movie, is the detective, Konakawa, who is one of Paprika's patients early on in the movie. His dream sequences are what we open on. I'm sure we'll end up talking about that opening dream sequence. But his kind of his experience with the mystery he's trying to solve, and the mental health issues he's trying to work through, dealing with this complex past with his unpursued dreams of becoming a filmmaker, which becomes a very meta part of the plot, kind of parallel the mystery that Chiba and Tokita are trying to solve on their end. And they end up working on the same projects altogether. Konakawa ends up being the detective assigned to the DC Mini case, and of course Paprika is trying to help the detective manage his dreams that he's having regarding this mystery murder that he can't solve. And the mystery murder, it doesn't, like, who actually killed the guy is not a central question of the plot. It's more of the fact that the detective can't get over this hump and solve the case that is more central to the plot.
So one of the most striking things about this movie is its use of surrealist images, which, I mean, obviously are kind of unavoidable when you're making a movie about people's dreams, and when the conflict starts to take place within dreams, you kind of have to get into some really trippy images, or else it's not gonna work off or get the right feel that you're going for. And we get some really, really strange things going on.
Well, yeah, like what better way to show these images than through, animation? And
Yeah,
it's definitely utilized here.
And this is one that I haven't heard any rumors of it getting a live action remake, which is great because I don't know if it's possible in this one. Sorry, Stanley Kubrick, who says if anything can be thought, dreamed, or written, it can be filmed. But yeah, anyway. But it's actually really cool. Some of the ways that we kind of get into or start to realize that we might be in a dream are characters who have been attacked by this dream thief is characters will start spouting nonsense.
Yeah.
And especially
I
when
thought
you're
my subtitles were broken.
Yeah, when you're listening to it in Japanese and reading the subtitles, you just kind of do a double take and you're like, wait, did I read that right? Or
Well, it's very reminiscent of dreams. Like, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but I know I have, and I would share a room with my brothers as kids, and they would just say things in their dreams, like very bizarre, like there's a frying pan on top of my refrigerator, let go of it. Like, what are they saying? Very, very true.
Yeah, and it's just really jarring, even though we know we're in a movie about dreams when we're, in the real world and suddenly people start talking nonsense.
It's awesome.
And then another thing is the way that we kind of switch between at least what most of the time we assume is the real world and the dream world is through match cuts. So that's when we're seeing one image and then all of a sudden the I guess animation in this instance cuts to an image that's almost the exact same. So a character might be in the same place or an action might be continuing, but we're suddenly in a new location.
Isn't the best one the one where she's walking up to like the fence at the amusement
rail,
park and she falls right through
she
it?
didn't jump over it. Yeah, that one's because she goes to jump over a rail and she puts her hand on it,
Gives me
and
chills.
suddenly the whole image warps, and then we cut and she's falling almost off of a building. But yeah, and another film that takes heavy influence from this movie is Christopher Nolan's Inception, which also kind of uses this technique of cutting between different dream levels without any distinction, really, until we're suddenly in the next one. And that really makes you lose track of where you are in the story. Because in a lot of other movies that would kind of handle this in a more cliche way, you get, dreamy, blurry vignettes around it, or it's brighter, or it's darker, or whatever, something to differentiate it. But in these films, it's just, we're just kind of watching and trying to take in context clues of, what kind of reality or whose perspective are we coming from. And then when dreams start merging, because that's a side effect of this hack into the DC Mini device, is that there are a limited number of these in the world, but at some point, whoever is wearing them, their dreams start to intertwine and mix, and that at that point, everything just gets out of control, and it's hard enough for the characters to keep track of where they are, let alone us.
Yeah.
Yeah, the real and the dream worlds literally merge at one point in the film.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of interesting parallels that the film tries to bring out. There's dreams being used as a metaphor for both filmmaking and the internet.
Yeah.
And they bring these out in some really interesting ways.
That is a very interesting thing. The internet thing was very new to me. I didn't catch that at the first watch, and this is a movie I've watched over and over again for years. It's one of my favorites. But for the first time, I noticed, the parallels between, Chiba and Paprika, how it's like a internet persona of some sort. Very interesting how
Paprika is kind of a Chiba's alter ego when she's using
like her
the DC
avatar.
Mini, right? In the dream world.
I don't mean blue people. I mean the internet version, like Ready Player One type avatar.
Yeah.
And then also, as far as filmmaking, like Alex said, one of the main characters, Konikawa, used to have dreams of being a filmmaker and has a lot of filmmaking knowledge. Mm-hmm. And in his dreams, we're seeing kind of rows of movie theaters playing movies, and he'll jump into movie scenes and stuff, and he kind of talks us through some really specific filmmaking techniques, like the 180 rule, which Satoshi Kon then actually breaks as an illustration and then literally flips the frame around to show us how it should be done. Yeah. And this is also an interesting parallel with Inception, because there's a lot of theories, although it's not as blatant in this film, but in Inception, people have theorized that the main cast of Inception kind of mirrors a film crew, with the director and the writer and the producers and the cast and all those kind of things. And so the fact that Inception draws on images from Paprika, which is a movie about how filmmaking mirrors dreaming, which a movie about dreaming that is a metaphor for filmmaking. It's just this whole kind of meta symbolism that's really interesting.
Yeah, I've always had a guilty pleasure for films that are meta about filmmaking, and I think a lot of creatives who are interested in film have that same tendency where we kind of like to. We already like exploring it, so of course we like movies about it. And the first 5 minutes of this film are all strung together, are all Konakawa's dreams that he and Paprika are exploring together as part of his treatment. But they're also every single one is a movie reference. They reference a Roman holiday, The Greatest Show on Earth, a spy movie whose name I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know what the train one was.
I was thinking From Russia with Love. Those were the vibes I was getting.
Is that
That's
it? I
just
think
me.
that might be it. I can't remember the exact
It felt
name
kind of
it.
Hitchcockian too, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't
they were
Strangers on a
definitely-
Train, but that's what I was going to.
But they definitely all were direct movie references, and they're all really rapid fire, jumping through dream to dream to dream, which is just kind of a nice way to open a film where you're going to be jumping back and forth between different levels of reality all the time. But it also kind of sets up just the visual style of Satoshi Kon really well with all of the match cuts. And I mean like perfect match cuts where Paprika is bringing down a briefcase on the bad guy's head, and then immediately it's the end of a guitar from
The famous
the
Roman holiday scene.
in Roman Holiday where Audrey Hepburn smashes a guitar on some guy's head.
It's good.
Hashtag Team Catherine. But
Hashtag Team Audrey.
you want to fight? Is that how you want this podcast to go?
And we will. The Battle of the Hepburns is coming to the podcast. Wait for it.
Just wait.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Oh man.
But it's these perfect match cuts that make this switch between realities flow really well. And for anybody who appreciates the craft of filmmaking, you kind of get giddy watching it. You're like, oh, that was done so well. And then, of course, it just makes you appreciate the realm of possibilities that come along with doing an animated film. You can do this really crazy dream imagery that they do, but you can also do a perfect match cut at a really quick speed too.
Yeah.
Because you can manipulate the way things show up in camera. Like 5 frames of a guitar coming down on someone's head will be a lot clearer and a lot more precise in animation than they would be in live action.
Yeah. And just kind of backtracking a little bit to the way that dreams parallel the internet, there's one scene that actually happens a couple times where Konakawa opens his laptop and enters a chat room, but we literally see him entering this bar that represents the chat room, where he talks to Paprika, his dream therapist. And so it's like this literal, like walking into this dream world of the internet where anything can happen kind of a thing. That was really interesting. That was kind of like sprinkled throughout, but it wasn't a heavy theme quite as much as the film parallels.
Right. RadioClub.jp is actually a real site that does exactly that.
Oh,
if you're ever
interesting.
interested in visiting it.
Oh, that actually brings me to another point that I wanted to make, which is the mixing of 3D and 2D animation, because those scenes where he's walking into this chat room are a use of 3D animation, whereas most of the characters and other points of the film are traditional cell hand-drawn animation. And this was kind of a fad in the 90s and early 2000s, even in American films, which you could see in like some of Disney's movies, like
Treasure Planet is an example.
specifically. But in this film, it just kind of elevated the story because it's so trippy and working on so many different levels that this mixing of a 3D environment and 2D environment worked really surprisingly well. Like at some point he was walking into that chat room, which is all built in a 3D environment, and I almost thought it was live action, and then I was like, oh yeah, this film is animated when the 2D characters started walking into it.
Something else I want to mention, and this is kind of different. This is something I realized as well after my 6th viewing. I'm just giving it a number. I've seen this a billions of times.
Yeah.
Something that really I related to, and I don't know if you guys will as well, but basically how the idea of, or not the idea, but the definition of dreams. Like for the movie, at first glance, you're thinking dreams, like nighttime dreams. But then as the film goes on, you start to realize it's more about the goals and aspirations of these characters. And how
it mixes those.
Yeah, like with Konakawa, his dream of becoming a director, and, things kind of didn't go the way he wanted to. He's kind of put it aside, and his dreams are, reminiscent of that. But it was very relatable for me going through the same kind of thing, watching this movie years ago back in high school when I was in a point. There was a line in the movie where it was Konakawa and the doctor, and they were walking outside, and they were talking about how I want to go back to college where I was dreaming about my future, right? And so now I'm kind of in the college age. I'm not really in college, but you guys are or have just finished. But I kind of relate to that. I want to go back to high school sometimes. I want to go back to when I was thinking about my future. And I'm always thinking about the opportunities I missed and things. And it's interesting how sitting in that moment where you're just stuck in nostalgia, you're stuck in those old dreams, you really get caught up in it and you don't progress, you don't go anywhere. So I love the resolve of the movie in the end where, I guess it's a spoiler, but we're getting towards the end of this thing. If I can kind of say, he does resolve. I'm not going to say how, but he does resolve, that conflict. And so he's able to be happier. He's able to enjoy movies again because somewhere in the movie, he's like, I hate them. I can't watch them.
Yeah.
Right? But it's relatable. And if you can find a way to connect yourself to that, I think you can find yourself really opening your mind and kind of being like, hey, maybe I am like this. Maybe there are things that I need to do. Just because you missed it in the past doesn't mean you can't do it now, or you can't live out that dream in your regular everyday, life experience. So I thought that was beautiful, and it choked me up after this viewing. I was just like, oh, how perfect. How perfect is that? I thought y'all could chew on that a little bit too.
Yeah, that's another idea that kind of ties this movie into our other two, is that a lot of these characters have kind of two sides to themselves. The dreaming side, the side where in the dream they can be everything that they wanted to be, or if they aren't, then they kind of feel like a part of them has died in the dream.
Yeah.
And that gets taken to either really good places or really bad places based on what the characters dream for themselves.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the conflict comes from. But that's all kind of the characters are able to interact with that through this technology of the DC Mini, which goes into our idea with the other movies of how technology kind of changes our self-perception once it starts to become a part of us. And in parts of this movie, the DC Mini literally becomes part of whoever's wearing it after this hack happens.
That nightmare fuel where the guy's got that thing in his head and like squirming
go,
around.
It's crazy.
It's good.
Yeah, so let's transition now into our spoiler section, our overall notes section, and start talking about how these films come together to kind of make a really interesting picture of what animation and anime films can be. And we're gonna talk about some of the bigger themes here, but I also want to say that I think that this kind of proves that these movies are more than just silly childish movies. They're not that at all. They're deep and meaningful and really well crafted and visually interesting and entertaining and thematically deep movies. And I'm going to get down off my soapbox and pass it over to Jonathan, because I know you've had a lot of big thoughts on the giant philosophy questions and conundrums that they've approached in these movies this week, and this merger between humanity and technology. I should say this clash between humanity and technology. Or maybe both. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, it was really interesting for me, and anyone who follows me on Twitter kind of saw that I was like having this kind of existential crisis with these movies, with like all the variety of themes, because like these are definitely not kids movies, and these present a lot of really big ideas, from Akira, with literally showing, and we're in the overall section, so we're probably going to get into some spoilers throughout here. So in Akira, we're seeing this idea of that literally gets to the Big Bang, and this idea that the universe is constantly destroying and then recreating itself and getting back to a point where, I don't know, I guess the creatures are so powerful that they go, it becomes this cycle of destruction and recreation and destruction again, that goes throughout. Whereas in Ghost in the Shell, like I said, it is bringing in biblical theology or biblical philosophies and stuff, which was really surprising to me, coming from a completely separate culture, which I actually think this film was developed in collaboration with some British companies and stuff too. So I'm not sure if that's where some of that came from, but that kind of takes it into this place where, as opposed to the technology being this destructive force, it's kind of this perfecting force. And then in Paprika, we're going even to a different place where the technology can just magnify the whatever is inside of a person. So now we're in the spoiler section now. So I'm going to say that the main antagonist, who is the chairman of this company that is developing the technology, who is
Professor X.
Yeah, basically.
he's wheelchair ridden and bald, and looks strikingly similar to maybe a Japanese Patrick Stewart. But his aspiration is to be, very large and powerful and able, which you see from someone who is disabled and might be bitter about it, having that kind of dreams. And the technology allows him to take over other people's dreams and literally suck the color out of the world.
Yeah.
And but then we see Paprika and Tokita. Finally, Paprika lets Chiba kind of release herself from this reserved side of herself that we're seeing on the outside. And Paprika is her freer self, who can basically do whatever she wants in the dream world because she's unrestrained from her insecurities, to reveal her crush on Tokita, and they actually combine to become this force of childlike love that literally absorbs all the darkness and puts the world right. So it's really this interesting range that I was not expecting from these movies that are all could be found in the same genre, this cyberpunk genre. And again, like going back to our Lost at Sea week quite a while ago now, it's this idea of taking the same elements, this element of what happens when humans and technology merge, and using that to present all different kinds of themes and theories. And that's what makes each film unique and impactful.
It's kind of like the same setup but different punchlines.
Yeah, and that's where we get, we've talked about it in some of our remake episodes, where you can even take the exact same plot and still come out with a different theme and have different, as long as you're saying something different and not just echoing what someone else has already said, but bringing something new to the table. That's what makes an effective film.
That's kind of the beauty, again, of Japanese animation and film, is they all kind of go off of the same kind of ideas, but they just deliver it in such a weird and new and bizarre way every single time. It's never the same thing, at least from what I've seen. That's how it is, and I just love that. It's and too, when you watch the movie again and again, it does feel new every single time, and that was definitely evident with these films.
Yeah, and of course we can't end the podcast without talking about the Ghost in the Shell live-action reboot. But we can end the podcast without talking about the Ghost in the Shell live-action reboot, because
you're the only one who's seen it so far.
That with Jason on his show. And Jason, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your show is?
Yeah, so my show is called Screen Test Premiere, and it is a show based around the movies coming out today. So I just kind of
It's on YouTube.
It is on YouTube, exactly. It's relatively short, usually 5 minutes, and I just kind of talk about the movie and my thoughts. I review it, and I kind of toss around the pros and cons and let you get to think about the film and decide what you think of it. If you've seen the movie, we can have a conversation. You can write your own reviews in the comments. I'll read them and I'll post them on my next video. It's a very community-based series. I just started it, so there's not too many people interacting just yet. But it's a lot of fun getting to talk with the people that are following it. It's just getting to talk about movies, which is why I'm here, because I like talking about movies, and I'm so honored that you guys had me on to do this with y'all and to show y'all the movies that I got to watch when I was younger and seeing y'all's reactions. Those was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you. You brought a lot to the conversation. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. I feel like I was just listening to y'all, so but still, yes, thank you.
And we're honored and excited to be on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're just going to kind of talk about the new movie, and we're going to look at the parallels and maybe even discuss the controversies surrounded around the movie, because there are those.
And we'll definitely be doing our best to make sure that info gets to you guys, our audience, that you have links to Jason's channel, and you have a direct link to the video that we are featured in, so you can see us.
Whenever that is posted,
talk about Ghost in the Shell
in person, you get to see them. You get to see the faces of the filmers.
Yes.
Isn't that exciting?
All right, very exciting. So, talking about next week on the Filmlings podcast, we are going back to Samurais and Sombreros Volume 2.
Our Japan kick continues.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for this week, we're doing another, obviously, samurai film, which was remade into a Western film. This time, the film is a little bit more well-known, I think, than The Magnificent Seven, at least until The Magnificent Seven was remade. Right. But anyway, the samurai film is also by Akira Kurosawa, who we had last time on Samurais and Sombreros, called Yojimbo from 1961. Which was remade by Sergio Leone into A Fistful of Dollars in 1964.
That's going to be cool.
Yeah, with I love A Fistful of Dollars, and I have not seen Yojimbo, so I am super excited to compare the two.
Nice.
Yeah, we have both. We get to see more of Toshiro Mifune in Yojimbo, and we get to see the American Toshiro Mifune, Clint Eastwood, in A Fistful of Dollars. Both, incredible people, even though I think more people know Clint Eastwood. So, and it should be it should be a fun week, essentially.
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting
absolutely.
at. And before we go, we have one other thing that we want to ask you, our audience. It would help us out a lot if you would take the time to go over to iTunes, find the Filmlings, and rate and review the podcast.
Yeah, that will help other people find it and kind of know what we're about. So if they come upon it and want to know what kind of things we talk about, you guys can tell them your impression.
Mm-hmm. And we would also love to hear what you guys have to think about us and our podcast, and the things you want to hear more of, and maybe the things that you think we need to work on. We love doing this for our own learning experience, but we also want to make sure we're delivering the best show possible to you guys each week.
Absolutely.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm found at The Blue Jay 1994.
And to find links to stuff that we talked about today, and a link to Jason's channel and the video that we'll be featured in, and also just to find a complete list of the films that we've talked about so far on the podcast, you can find them on the blog now at thefilmlings.wordpress.com.
Well, hey, thanks for having me on the show, guys. Real talk. It was an honor, and I'm so glad I got to finally share these movies with someone else who is willing to, take them. They're not really easy to take in at first, but you guys are troopers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for introducing us to these films.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Man. What was y'all's favorite movie, if I may ask? What was the favorite of the three?
Paprika.
I
Yeah.
thought so.
Paprika.
Same with me. I love all of these movies, but Paprika, it's easy to watch over and over and over. It's a lot of fun. Cool.
For sure. Well, thank you for coming on the show again, Jason. And I will talk to you next week, Jonathan.
All right. See ya. Canada! There you go.